Okay, test on Thursday. Remember, bring your calculators. You'll do the efficiency template as we did it in class on Thursday. Remember, 15 points is going to be for doing the calculations. 5 points is just answering the question, does this make sense? Right? Use the Thursday recording to help you prepare. Everything's there for that. All right. We'll probably have another 4 essay questions. You answer 2, and there'll be 3 or 4 bonus questions on the back. It'll be in class. Okay. 30 questions, multiple guess. They will be equally distributed between the 3 chapters. All right. Okay, including this stuff. So when I ended talking about the efficiency template, and I've kind of talked about this more and more, is the whole idea of understanding why do we go through the machinations that we do. And as I remember, I told you, one of the dangers that we have to avoid is doing excessively well. Or in other words, what I mean is doing more than we have to do. It's vitally important that we understand where the consumers are and where they're going, because as I've said before, we're talking about a lot of money and we need to be very careful about the way that we spend it. This is what's known as the zero-based channel concept. All right. What you wish to do is you want to perform the necessary channel functions to produce service outputs at a minimum cost. It is a danger that you fall into, but a necessary evil, because one of the worst ways, or let's just say one of the only ways that you have to be able to function as efficiently as possible is to reduce your inventory. So I've said over and over again, inventory holding costs. Remember, physical possession plus ownership is inventory holding cost. Inventory holding is a cost, not an asset. It ties up important capital. And so one of the things that you do is you try to lengthen the lifespan of goods. You find vendors that supply you faster. You work on those or have those goods that would be considered shelf stable and resilient. In other words, they're not going to change over a period of time. And then, unfortunately, what you might do is reduce variety. It's not surprising that a Walmart does not have a great deal of variety. They just want to make sure they don't have enough inventory. Oh my God, I went into Dollar General yesterday down the hill. They had organic. My wife will never be the same. The thought of not having to go across the street to be able to get organic milk that you could just write down there. The world has changed 360. Anyway, the purpose of a zero-based channel in the presence of uncertainties is a key goal. You want to be able to have a necessary amount, but the difficulty with having too little is a concept that's known as the bullwhip effect. Have they taken all of the chalk? Dear God, what a way to run forever. Okay, so what is the bullwhip effect? So, draw a bullwhip if I can. Pinky piece of. All right. Anybody ever see a bullwhip? Somebody do it. It's pretty fascinating, isn't it? The sound that a bullwhip makes is not itself touching. The tip of a bullwhip breaks the speed of sound. And that's what the crack is that you hear. It's a fascinating thing to watch. Anyway, so I want you to think of the bullwhip with the consumer on one end and the manufacturer on the other. All right. So Think of the wholesalers here, the retailers here. And what happens is, with the bullwhip effect, a little movement up or down creates higher oscillations as you move down the levels, okay? Little changes in demand create great changes up the supply chain. Because, once again, the economies of scale are such that I can't just produce 50 more because there are 50 more consumers. I have to produce in lots of 10,000 and 50,000. And therein lies the rub and the dangers of the bullwhip effect. But it is an acceptable danger. So I'm going to show you this to give you a better idea. Let's see. Come on, drag out. Come on, don't be bashful. There you go. So, bless you. So, way back when we played Miami and they came here to App State, all of a sudden the consumer demand for beer went higher. Well, the problem with that is that the demand to the distributor went higher and the factory distributing went even higher, and the inventory for the retailer went lower, the wholesaler was even lower, and the factory even dipped further than that as well. All right. And so what we found is that when App State drinks about 50,000 units of beer on a weekend, we cause all sorts of problems. All right. And this is the classic example. So you're doing your job drinking beer. Good job. All right. And they may have beat us on the field, but they didn't beat us in the bars. All right. So this is what the bullwhip effect means. Small consumer demands create greater, wider fluctuations up the tree. All right. So with that, go home and have a beer. All right. Yes.
This is being recorded, right?
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure because
You wanted to see this. Yeah, you're gonna wonder what did he just say?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I never said it was. All right. Oh, one other thing I wanted to do before I go on also, in the description of the efficiency template. So we talked about that, but this is the thing I also wanted to meet that was important for you to understand, and that is the equity principle. I've talked about it multiple times, but this is where you actually see it. The equity principle basically states an honest day's wage for an honest day's work, that the level of compensation in a channel system should reflect a degree of participation. Performance is key. Performance is everything. We need to be able to reward individuals, for the value that they bring. This is one of the main purposes of the equity principle, because it gives you a measurement of the actual cost incurred based upon the value that they bring. And in many cases, the normative profit share will not match what is suggested by the efficiency template. I would probably say never matches. But it's a great tool for going out and pounding the table that there needs to be some changes made. And so basically just know the equity principle. Compensation should equal participation. Okay. Now, the truth is that the zero-based channel may not even exist. That based upon difficulties, especially with what are known as managerial and environmental bounds, quite simply, there may be no way whatsoever that we can actually close the gap as small as we wish. And we'll talk about managerial and environmental boundaries. It is the nature of things, all right? Managerial bounds are limitations based upon our organizations we work in. Environmental bounds are just the physical limitations outside the organizations. Since I'm leading up to it, let's go talk about it. We wish channel members would think more completely about the desires of their particular members, but they don't. It's as simple as that, all right? Channels has a nasty habit of simply changing things without an understanding of how they affect the end users. And remember, the end users are the purpose for being there. Remember also, end users perform certain channel functions. So leaving the consumer out is done at your own peril. And so there are boundaries that create gaps in the service and the cost of doing goods. The first is environmental bounds. And environmental bounds are quite simply those constraints that form outside the channel. Constraints that are outside the channel. Legal boundaries. I was hiking with my son many, many years ago, and there was an eagle feather on the ground. I told him he could not even touch it because that's against the law. All right. So just to give you an idea. So, and you could tell it was an eagle feather, but we had to leave it where it was. Native Americans can collect eagle feathers, but to have one is a federal offense. So those are constraints outside of my boundaries. Managerial bounds are constraints that happen inside organizations, and these are the ones that we can do something about. Managerial bounds many times do silly things. So I used to collect tablets. I got into like the $20, $30 tablets that Android was making, and they were kind of interesting to me. Generally, it was the video that was not the best, but they ran all the versions of Androids. They were kind of cool for a while to get into. But one of these tablet manufacturers started getting returns, and they got real ticked off about it. And they made a statement that said, you can no longer return, well, tablets can only be returned if they suffer some breakage in one way or another. So what do you think people did? Exactly. They did. Okay. So that's an example of a managerial bound, thinking that they had this brilliant idea of being able to limit, but of course the consumer was smarter than they were, and they figured out a way. So instead of getting ones they could recondition, they got ones broken beyond all comprehension. Good job. All right. So moving on to that, we are now going to talk about when managers create managerial bounds, they create what are called service gaps. Service gaps happen two ways. One way is when the amount that the service is supplied is less than the service demand. When I talked about being able to get vodka in Russia or beer in Mexico, there was a gap there that was not being fulfilled by the channels, and consumers found a way. And so, with this service supplied less than service demanded, let me take you a trip down memory lane. Okay, so when I grew up, these were known as 45s. So 45s came around in the 50s. L playing albums, by the way, If you look at I bought my daughter Taylor Swift when she was so happy. Now I got to buy. I didn't think that out. Anyway, so the 78s literally were this big, very heavy, and they actually, had signal, or they had the audio tracks that were built into vinyl. All right. So as compression technology got better, you were able to put more sound on a particular disc. So much so that you started what were called 45s. That's exactly what they were called. They were also called singles. And what you could do is you could put one song on an A and then another song on a side B. So you didn't have a blank side. You had a side A and a side B. This is where American Top 40 came from originally, the top 40 singles that were sold in the United States. And then you also had what were things called B-side wonders, or B-side wonders were the B-side, which was supposed to be the not good record. And they were the ones that sold millions. So Kung Fu Fighting actually was put together in 15 minutes. And that was a B-side single that became number one. So when I would be working on my stuff in my room, I would have a turntable like this. You needed this little funky thing in the middle to fit on the turntable. And I would stack about 10 or 12 songs. And that's how I played my music. Okay. And that would be my playlist as I did it in the 60s and 70s. So fast forward, coming into the 80s, you started to see the advent of compact discs. Compact discs came in and kind of revolutionized the way we did things, but compact discs had a very, very difficult, severe limitation in that compacts couldn't do singles. And so the industry, in this managerial bound situation, decided that singles would no longer be printed, even though service demanded from consumers that we wanted singles. Well, in the 70s, they started to format with digital inputs and outputs, and they suddenly realized that you could take songs and record them in a digital format. And the perfect vehicle came along in the 90s, known as the internet, dial-up internet, and this little company by the name of Napster found a way to share music, okay? So if you look at this was kind of like your control panel with Napster. So these are the songs that you had queued up from someone else. You shared your songs also in a distributed network. So these are your songs downloading. You put your dial-up internet, you go to bed, and 12 hours later, you get all these songs down, and the whole system erupted, all right? This is a natural progression. The service supplied was less than the service demanded. Eventually, Napster went out, and it was absolutely no surprise at all when iTunes came along in 2008 and made $1.5 billion in their first year and was the number one in terms of total profit of all of the things that Apple did. Consumers were dying for it. And so this is where service supplied was less than the service demanded. So that's the first one. The next is the service supplied is greater than the service demanded. So along with all those wonderful albums that I grew up with, we also have what were known as record stores, okay? So the record stores, if you wanted to get albums, you would go and you would browse through. The record shops also had head shops in them and blacklight posters and those kind of things. This is actually a record store in New York where you could actually take a vinyl, God help you scratch it, and you could actually go in a booth and hear the record before you actually were able to purchase it. So this is a classic example. The amount of service supplied was greater than the service demanded. Let me also say Blockbuster. Does anybody know that name? Okay, you know Blockbuster. Cool. Okay. Yes. So Blockbuster in the 90s was the place to be. All right. Blockbuster used to have a line 5 miles long on a Friday. And a Blockbuster, you'd go to rent your videos there. You hope your video was there by the time you got there, because there was a rush at around 5 o'clock when everybody got off work to go get their video for the weekend. And a Blockbuster also had popcorn and candy and everything else you'd want to get. It was a place where you could order videos. And so then around in 2005, 2006, this little company came along named Redbox that said, perhaps we don't need this great big single store where 5,000 people come to get one video. Maybe we need 5,000 red boxes across the whole city, and people can go get them one at a time. And that's what happened. All right. It became a place where the service supplied matched the way that service was demanded. And Blockbusters, I think there's one store left in the United States now. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's still there. You know, God knows how. But you know, Blockbusters were places where you met everybody. You know, they came like, you know, you'd see the same people in line every Friday. So anyway, this is an example of service supplied less than service demanded, service supplied greater than service demanded. Now, the difficulty with the service supplied greater than the service demanded means that you have cost gaps too. Cost gaps only go one way. Cost gap goes when the total cost of performance is too high. There is no such thing as performing services where the cost is too low. If you're performing services and your costs are low, that's golden, okay? So what they're saying here is they're saying at CDW, they spend an enormous amount of money to train salespeople, but their churn rate, their turnover rate was 25%, which meant 1 out of every 4 salespeople left in the first year. And it became a catch-22 because CDW was churning out all sorts of great salespeople for other places. Which I argue maybe your compensation package stinks because good salespeople stick around if they find they can make money. One of the worst decisions Circuit City made in 2007, 2008, I don't know if you remember Circuit City, was they decided to take their salespeople off of compensation. In other words, amounts or getting money for the things they sold, and they went to straight salary. And no true salesperson worth their salt will work and not get some product of their labor. So what happened? They went to Best Buy, and then Circuit City collapsed. Best Buy came along. They did the same thing, realized they were starting to lose salespeople, and guess what? They've reverted to some kind of rebating system where the salespeople get compensation. So there are better ways of controlling cost gaps besides spending less on people, okay? So this is kind of a little chart. You don't have to memorize this. I'm not asking you to reproduce this. Just remember, if I talk about service gaps, I will ask the questions, what are service gaps? Remember that service supplied less than service demanded, service supplied greater than service demanded. Remember, cost gaps only go one way. Remember that. Now, we find that in closing gaps, we sometimes have to perform actions to be able to lower or to decrease the gaps. If I have no direct way of controlling cost gaps, then I've only really got 2 ways that I can deal with this. One way is through postponement, in which I put off incurring costs as long as possible. Got things I got to do. I'll pay the bills that I absolutely must have to in order to move down. but I will only incur those costs when I have to. The other is speculation, where I will produce goods fast in anticipation of orders rather than in response to them. This was the conundrum that the Nintendo Wii found itself in. As I said before, when 6 months before the Wii was introduced, the Wii was introduced when Nintendo was about 6 months from bankruptcy. They were cash poor. And when the Wii came on the floor, everything changed. I remember 18 months before the Wii came out, I was reading through the trade journals and they were talking about a kinetic interface that's going to change everything. And Nintendo, to their credit, kept their unique way of having decent graphics, but spending so much of it in playability. My son still is just a Nintendo freak. But the difficulty Nintendo had was how much money do they spend without any knowledge of what ultimately anticipating how far they're going to go in the game. And 2006 came along and it just blew everything away. All right. So for the next 3 years in a row, well, they started in postponement. Nintendo started doing speculation. They bought the farm in trying to produce enough units, and those units were sold out by late November. So they were even going into Christmas without anything. They, as much as they wanted to, they just couldn't simply do it. Yeah.
The reason they produce so many is because the Wii is basically just a restructured Wii. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of components that they just put in there. That's why there isn't much of a difference between the two.
Yeah.
But it was why they were able to do so much. Because the GameCube and the N64 almost bankrupt.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it did. And you know, it actually was ironically a great smart decision, whether they wanted to or not, because it kept their library, which is the best, one of the best libraries out there. Yeah. Yeah, it really worked well. That's that downward compatibility with Nintendo. I give a lot of respect for that. They followed that pathway and they created that unique vision. It certainly isn't the PlayStation and it's not the Xbox.
they don't really do it too much anymore. But
Yeah, well-
they used to.
Yeah, well, the Switch now, my son has a Switch and he's got the pocket version of it. And
Like,
yeah, yeah, and yeah, that's pretty awesome. Anyway, I go on for hours, so better not. But that's, yeah, so here's an example. So end users will engage in postponement when it depends on certain things like the exact tracks that they want, all right? Book publishers and book sales usually feature speculation. So I bought the UHD version of Babylon 5 and I ordered that 6 months ago and it finally came in. It's brilliant. It's still not in 1020 or 1078. I mean, it's not there in high def, but it's close enough. Anyway, because it comes down to money, end users are willing to speculate if they feel the value that they receive is going to be high. What I did with Babylon 5. Physical books require speculation. You have to put money forward to build to make them. In the electronic book channel, of course, when one copy is as good as any, postponement is the predominant because you don't want postponement to get in the way of the physical copy. We've gotten kind of mixed up in the film industry is right now because when COVID came along, they came up with a brilliant idea of releasing it in a streaming service at the same time that they released it in the theaters. And now they've really muddied the water up because now consumers are not sure whether they should wait, postpone, or invest in speculation unless it's like a real eye candy movie, you know, like Top Gun or something like that. So, what are the keys? Speculation depends on the cost and the intensity of demand for quick delivery. And very, very much of that is led entirely by the consumers. And it's why we need to pay attention. So the flash slide about gap analysis template, you do not have to know. And we're done. And that's it with chapter 3. Okay. Are there any questions about the test or anything?
Well, is there like any sort of step guide?
Well, I would definitely use all the slides.
Yeah.
Yeah, the PowerPoints. Realize that I do as much as I can to really focus on things that are especially important. Remember that the end user, okay? Remember, channels are manufacturers, intermediaries, and end users. Only those 3. Intermediaries are wholesalers, retailers, and specialized. The end user is a part of the channel system because they perform channel functions. That's maybe a 10-point question right there. All right. Remember about your cost gaps and your service gaps. Those are important. Remember about market segmentation. What is the process of going through market segmentation? Remember your definitions because that's going to be important. Also know this is that there'll be some questions that are easy and then some that are going to be hard. There'll be questions that say most likely. Those will be the hard questions. There may be 2 answers in there that are reasonable, but one is the best answer. All right. And I'll also say I do grade on it. Oh, I do grade Kirby too. Okay.
When you say that a lot of the questions are based on situations using concepts from the actual slides, or you're using the slides themselves?
They will come from concepts where you'll take. So instead of buying this book today, Richard decided that he would buy this book in the next few months. This is an example of exactly. That's what the question. Okay. Yeah.
How many short answer did you say we have to do?
They're essay questions. You have 2 essay questions, and there'll be 4 for you to choose from.
Okay.
So just choose 2. If you want to try 3, I'll give you the top, out of that. Okay. Yeah, if you want to, sure. Don't leave a blank. I will give you points for a drawing. Okay. You should see I've got a bunch of your fellow artists who went blank and drew me nice pictures and I gave them credit. Okay. So don't leave 10 points blank in one way or another. Okay. So I guess that's basically it. I swear anything I will give you credit for. Okay. And you should see what I'm giving you credit on.
Give it my best shot.
Y'all, but the comedians. Anything else?
I think it's lit.
Okay, folks. Email me if you have any questions. I'll see you Thursday. Bring your calculators. Remember, efficiency time. 30 multiple choice questions, 2 points apiece. So that's 60 points. The calculation is 20 points. And then two essay questions, 10 points apiece, and a few bonus. Remember the question, does this make sense?
Yeah.
When it comes to the efficiency. Okay. Remember we talked about contracts. Remember that.
I was like. I agree.